Hello, Year 10. Hope you're all doing very well. I'm fine here. It's a challenge working from home, isn't it? If my dog starts barking or you hear my children in the background making breakfast, whatever, I apologise. Miss Jones has asked you to have a look at Blake's poem London from the anthology today. She's attached a copy in case you've not got your anthology. I like this poem, though it's not an easy poem. It's very much a poem of its time. It was published about 1794, and it's described as a romantic poem. Now, romantic, when you apply it to literature, isn't the same as a romantic dinner for two, with candles and, a waiter bringing you flowers for you, whatever. It's romanticism in terms of the art movement was something that happened from the second part of the 18th century and into the early 19th century, really. It was a time, and we've talked about this in class, haven't we, when the country was changing. It was being industrialized. Small villages were becoming grubby towns with factories. The cities were becoming densely populated. A lot of poverty, poor, inadequate housing, the countryside being eaten up for industry, factory chimneys belching out smoke. And you can imagine people who were sensitive and enjoyed the countryside found this a frightening time. They saw their world changing. And in the poem London, William Blake describes walking around the city of London and just seeing things changing, really. He sees industrialization, he sees loss of freedom, but most of all, he sees the unhappiness, the poverty, and the misery of the people around him. I'll just go through it stanza by stanza, if that would help you. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. You'll notice the repetition there, the word marks, and here it means blemishes, stains, damage. So the people, everything's damaged, everything's stained, blemished, or spoiled. And he also talks about the streets and the River Thames being chartered, and that means mapped out, put on a chart, which means it's no longer freely accessible. So people are restricted in terms of their movements around. That was a big concern to the people writing during the Romantic movement. They were very into freedom and being able to go where they wanted to. Here in London, the people are restricted, and it shows on their faces. They're weighed down, they're blemished, they're damaged, they're unhappy. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. You'll notice the word every repeated, okay, to emphasize that this is, wholesale, big scale unhappiness. The children are crying, the adults are crying. You just see unhappiness everywhere, the restrictions, the bans that are put on people. All of them create what Blake describes as mind-forged manacles. Now, manacles are those old-fashioned iron sort of rings that prisoners would have on their wrists. You sometimes see them in old cartoons, don't you? If you see a prisoner like chained to a stone wall. Here it's a metaphor. They are mind forged, so they're not physically in prison, but they're sort of psychologically restricted. They feel chained down. And Blake goes on in the third stanza to talk about the chimney sweepers. Now, at a time of great poverty, families were under pressure to send out even very, very young children. Children aged 3 and 4 would go out and become chimney sweeps in the poorest families because they could actually physically fit up the chimney because they were so small. An appalling, dangerous occupation. Many of these young children were killed. They were poisoned by the smoke, by the sulphur in the fumes, or burned. Not a good thing. And in fact, there was a lot of reforms took place afterwards to try and prevent this happening. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. So here Blake is referring to the church standing by and watching this happening and being appalled by the level of human misery, being appalled by the sight of the little chimney sweepers sacrificing their lives, risking their lives. Notice though that the church isn't doing anything. It just sort of seems to be standing by, appalled, horrified by what it sees, but there's not a sense here that the church is doing anything. And I think there's a criticism there of the church, of the establishment, and the church is described as blackening. And that might be the soot on the stone. These stone buildings in a smoky city would very quickly become black, but also maybe there's a sense that it's a place of darkness, of unhappiness, not a place of spiritual light, which perhaps it should have been. And Blake refers to the soldiers as being hapless. That means unlucky, maybe unlucky that they have to become soldiers because there's no other work for them. The hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Maybe the soldiers are being paid to control the masses of people who are on the point of rebellion, maybe. He envisages his sigh as running in blood down the palace walls. That's a complicated image, isn't it? But it's a direct reference to the French Revolution, which took place, a couple of decades before that, just across the Channel, where the poverty in France was so great, the wealth was held by very, very few people, that in the end the peasants revolted. They sieged the palaces, they turfed out the royal family, and they killed them, they executed them with the guillotine. And that level of bloodshed could happen here. That's what Blake's saying. It's a kind of warning to us. The last stanza, he talks about the prostitutes or harlots. He describes basically how, how they're screaming at their presumably unwanted babies. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. It's a complicated set of images, that, isn't it? He talks about, youthful and newborn, things that should be celebrated and beautiful. But here, it's a youthful harlot, a young woman, a young girl, really, having to turn to prostitution because there's no other way for her to survive. And she, in turn, is screaming at her newborn baby, blasting its ear with curses and swearing. And all those sounds, he says, blights with plagues the marriage hearse. That's a complicated thing, isn't it? And marriage hearse, an oxymoron, an impossibility. A hearse is something that would transport coffins to the graveyard for burial, but here it's a marriage hearse. And I think that complicated imagery there, that oxymoron, is saying that this image of the prostitute screaming at her baby is basically saying that love, that marriage as a means of love is over. Okay, that sort of commitment, that religiously blessed love is a thing of the past. It's dead. It's in a hearse. The only kind of love here is the sexual gratification of people having to go to prostitutes. So not a positive image. You've got 4 stanzas, haven't you? You've got each one sort of tackling a different aspect of what he sees as he moves around the city. What we call the meter, the beat, is quite ponderous and steady. I wander through each chartered street, and every cry of every man. It's like footsteps, I think, moving through the city. Okay. Read it again. Listen to this video again. Sorry if I've said stuff that might have confused you. That wasn't my intention. I was hoping to make it a bit clearer for you. But read the poem, look at the PowerPoint, and have a go at the tasks. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.